Hello everyone, I think we are live streaming. Let me check. Okay, so we are officially live. I'm going to continue this JavaScript certification on freeCodeCamp. We remain at the objects and let's continue. How do you work with accessing properties from nested objects and arrays in objects? When working with JavaScript, you'll often encounter complex data structures that involve nested objects and arrays within objects. These structures can represent rich hierarchical data, but they also require a clear understanding of how to access and manipulate the data within them. So let's explore how to navigate these nested structures effectively. So accessing properties from nested objects involves using the dot notation or bracket notation, much like accessing properties from simple objects. However, you'll need to chain these accessors to drill down into the nested structure. For example, let's consider a nested object representing a person with contact information. So we have this person with a name, age, contact, and on the contact we have his email and the phone, and on the phone we have the home and the work. Okay, to access Alice's work phone number, you will chain the property accessors like this. So console log person dot contact dot phone dot work. Okay, we can also use bracket notation, which is particularly useful when property names include spaces or special characters, or when you are using variables to access properties. Okay, so here we can see that we have the bracket notation, contact, phone, and work. Now let's take a look at how we can access data where one of the object properties has the value of an array. Here is a modified person object that includes an array of addresses. So we have person name Alice, age 30, addresses type home, street 123 Main Street, city any town. And the work street 456 Market Street, city Workville. Okay, here is an example of how to access Alice's work address city. So we have person of address is 1, okay, and then the city, which is Workville. Okay. In this example, person.addresses refers to the array of addresses. To access the second address in that array, we use bracket notation and index 1. Then we use the notation you access the work phone number from this object. So it's going to be person.contact.phone.work. This is the one. What will be the output of the following code? Person, details, hobbies. Of one is going to be swimming. In the following code, what will be logged to the console? So we have data results of one of name, which is going to be Bob. Okay, check answer. Nice. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so what is the difference between primitive and non-primitive data types? So in JavaScript, understanding the difference between primitive and non-primitive data types is important for writing efficient and bug-free code. These two categories of data types behave differently in terms of how they are stored in memory and how they are manipulated in your programs. Primitive data types are the simplest form of data in JavaScript. They include number, big int, string, boolean, null, undefined, and symbol. These types are called primitive because they represent single values and are not objects. When you work with primitive data types, you are dealing directly with their values. For example, when you create a variable with a primitive value, that value is stored directly in the variable. So primitive values are immutable, which means once they are created, their value cannot be changed. However, you can reassign a new value to the variable. It is an example of working with primitive data types. We have num1, which is going to be 5, num2 is going to be 1, num1. Num1 is going to become 10, and num2 is going to remain 5. In this example, we are assigning a primitive value 5 from num1 to num2. This creates an independent copy of the value. As a result, any changes made to the original variable num1 do not affect the copy num2. Right. Non-primitive data types, on the other hand, are more complex. In JavaScript, these are objects which include regular objects, arrays, and functions. Unlike primitives, non-primitive types can hold multiple values as properties or elements. Okay, when you create a variable with a non-primitive value, what's stored in the variable is actually a reference to the location in memory where the object is stored, not the object itself. This leads to some important differences in behavior. Here is an example with non-primitive types. So we have the original person, which is going to have name John and age 30. Copied person is going to be the original person. Original person of age is going to be 31, so the copied person.age is going to be 31. In this example, we have an object called original person with two properties of name and age. We then assign the original person object to a variable called copied person. Then we update the age value for the original person object. When we log the age property of the copied person object, it shows the updated value. But why is that happening? This occurs because both original person and copied person are referencing the same object in memory. Okay. So they are referencing the same object in memory, so basically this is a deep copy, something like that in JavaScript. When you assign an object to another variable, you are copying the reference to the object and not the object itself. This is known as shallow copying by reference. Okay, so it's a shallow copying by reference. Okay, as a result, any changes made to the object through one reference are reflected in all references to that object. As you continue to work with JavaScript, you'll encounter many situations where understanding the difference between primitive and non-primitive types is important. It's a fundamental concept that underlies many aspects of the language and is key to writing efficient and correct code. Questions: which of the following is not a primitive data type in JavaScript? It's not a primitive. I think it's the array. Right. What happens when you assign a primitive value to a new variable? The value is copied to the new variable. What will be the output of the following code? X is gonna be 10, I is gonna be X, is gonna be 20, so I is gonna be 10. Check answer, okay. Okay, so what is the difference between functions and object methods? So in JavaScript, functions and object methods are both ways to encapsulate reusable code. So functions and object methods, okay, are both ways to encapsulate reusable code, but they have some key differences in how they are defined, used, and the context in which they operate. Understanding these differences is crucial for writing effective and organized JavaScript code. As you learned in earlier modules, functions are usable blocks of code that perform a specific task. So we have the function greet name, return hello plus name. So console log greet Alice is gonna be hello Alice. Okay. Object methods, on the other hand, are functions that are associated with an object. So they are defined as properties of an object and can access and manipulate the object's data. Here's an example of an object with a method. So we have the object person, which has a name, age, and the say hello function, which is going to return hello, my name is this.name. Console person dot say hello is going to be hello, my name is Bob. In this example, say hello is a method of the person object. This keyword allows the say hello method to access the properties of the object named person. Okay, you'll learn more about this keyword in future lessons. So the difference between functions and methods is how they are invoked. Functions are called by their name, while methods are called using the notation on the object they belong to. For example, we call the greet function as greet Alice, but we call the say hello method as person.say hello. Another important difference is the context in which they operate. Regular functions have their own scope, but they don't have a built-in reference to any particular object. Methods, however, are bound to their object and can access its properties and other methods using this keyword. So a key point to note is that methods help in organizing code into logical objects, while functions are used for more general reusable code. Understanding the difference between functions and object methods is important as you progress in your JavaScript journey. While they may seem similar at first, recognizing when to use each will help you write more organized, efficient, and better code. Questions. What is the main difference between a function and an object method? So functions can take parameters, but methods cannot. I don't think so. Methods are associated with objects, while functions are standalone. This is the main difference. Given the following code, how would you correctly call the greet function? Person.greet. Okay, what will be the output of the following codes? We have say hello, have object, say hello function, return hi there. What will be the output of the following? So we have first say hello, which is gonna be hello, then we have hi there. So hello, exclamation point, hi there. Nice. Next. What is the object constructor and when should you use it? So in JavaScript, the constructor is a special type of function used to create and initialize objects. It is invoked with the new keyword and can initialize properties and methods on the newly created object. In this lesson, we will take a look at how to work with the object constructor. The object constructor creates a new empty object. Here is an example. So we have this new object. When you call a new object, it returns a new object that can be used to store values. Okay, the object constructor can be used with or without the new keyword. When called as a function without new, it behaves differently depending on the type of value passed to it. Here is an example of using the object constructor without the new keyword. So we have num equals 42, num object of num, creates an object wrapper for the number, console log num objects, then we have type of num object is going to be an object. So as you can see in the second console log, num object is an object. This is happening because we use the object constructor to turn that input of a number into an object. So what happens if we try to pass a null or undefined to the object constructor? So new object is going to be new object undefined, and when we console log the new object is going to be an empty object. So well, the result will be an empty object. Another use case for the object constructor is when you are working with a value of unknown type and you need to ensure it's an object. So let's take a look at the following example. So we have this function doObject, which has a value. If the value is going to be null or the value is going to be undefined, we're going to return an empty object. If the type of the value is going to be an object, we are going to return the value. Otherwise, we're going to return an object with the value. So okay, I kind of understand. So in this example, we have a function called toObject. The second condition will check if the value is the type of object and will return a value if the condition is true. This condition will check for objects as well as their arrays, since arrays are special types of objects. Okay. If neither of the conditions is true, the function returns object of value, which converts the input into an object. This works for values like numbers, strings, and booleans. Most of the time you will not be using the object constructor to create a new object, because you will be using object literal syntax instead. That is constant object literal equals name, bow, but it is still good to understand the basics of working with the object constructor. So we have the questions: what will be the output of the following code? So we have obj, which is going to be object of 42. Console type of obj is going to be an object. What's the difference between a new object and this one? New object creates an empty object, while this one doesn't. There's no difference, they both create an empty object. I think this is thing. When might you use object constructor instead of the object literal notation? When you want to create an object wrapper for a primitive value. Okay. And we just finished the theory for the objects, and we are gonna go to the workshop. Then we have a lab, then we have some JSON thing, then we have some chaining and structuring, then we have another workshop, another lab review, and a quiz. build a wildlife tracker. So okay, in this workshop you will build a simple wildlife tracker using JavaScript objects. So in this here's an example of an object. So we have this animal, this is an empty object, this creates an empty object. So now create a variable named tiger and assign it an empty object. So we have let tiger, which is gonna be an empty object. For this wildlife tracker, you will update an object with new properties. So here is an example of creating an object with a property. So we have example code animal, we have the name lion, property value. Now update the tiger object so it includes a property called species. So species, and it's gonna have a tiger value. Next.